This Voice of San Diego podcast is brought to you by Manilatos Nelson Murphy, Advertising and Public Relations. M&M is run by Tony Manilatos, Bob Nelson, and Kelly Murphy Lampkin, who bring a vast network and decades of advertising and public relations experience to businesses, nonprofits, government agencies, and campaigns. M&M bridges the gap between clients and the people whose influence matters most. M&M is a full-service agency that helps clients develop their strategy and launch cost-effective tactics. The firm specializes in public affairs PR and advertising with an emphasis on media relations, crisis communications, community outreach, coalition building, broadcast, print, direct mail, and digital advertising. Our reporters at Voice of San Diego have certainly heard a lot from Bob and Tony over the years. Tony, Bob, and Kelly are supporters of Voice of San Diego. Learn more about their firm at mnmadpr.com. Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo. My name is Scott Lewis, and I'm here with my friend Andrew Keatts.
What's up, my man?
What's up, brother?
Not a lot.
And amiga Sara Libby.
What's up?
How are you?
Pretty good.
Very excited to be here today. I have a opening rant, something I'd like to talk about.
You typically do. It's become the format of the show.
It's about editorial boards and house editorials, as they're known, the newspapers. So let's do a little media literacy workshop quickly.
First of all, when people contact me mad about editorials,
yes,
they're not talking about editorials because we don't run those.
Yes, exactly. So in my college paper, we used to do house editorials. These are the unsigned things, right? Mm-hmm. And all the editors would get in a room and we'd fight for 45 minutes and decide what to write about.
Same.
Yeah. And then,
beautiful ritual.
And we would assign one person to write about that on behalf of everybody, right? It was our view.
We had one girl who her idea every week was to applaud something.
Oh.
Let's applaud this move to put out more trash cans. And we'd always be like, stop trying to applaud things.
Yeah. Well, as student journalists, too, you're always like, I am on fire today.
Exactly.
I mean, everything was just the biggest deal.
So did that girl become a PIO?
No, she became a lawyer.
Okay.
So that's one way. That's the idea of literally a true convening of the entire leadership of a paper to decide what the paper's view is on something. And the house editorial is one that doesn't have a byline. It's supposed to reflect that view, right? So editorial boards around the country handle this basically for newspapers. And often they are a collection of editors from the newspaper and people, but also mostly it's a collection of opinion writers for the newspaper, and sometimes participation of various like ownership structures,
publisher,
or even the editor-in-chief of the paper.
Mm-hmm. It's often folks who spent years in reporting, but who migrated to the editorial section, and now they're solely editorial writers.
Right. And so what's happened is this sort of house editorial, again, these unsigned views from God of this is the position of the paper, has morphed because obviously it caused some problems. If the newspaper had a very strident, specific opinion through one of these unsigned house editorials, it would make some of the reporters on that paper uncomfortable because they would have to explain to their sources, that's not my view, that's the view of blank, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so the hard part about that is that they were kind of having it both ways. Now, as time has gone on, they've really made an effort in many papers to say that these editorials are the work and the view of the editorial board, not just not sign it. They actually say by the editorial board or something like that, right?
Right. Meaning this is not the view of the whole paper, making it easier for reporters to draw a distinction that they do not co-sign that belief. They hold their own standards of objectivity the editorial board is this separate thing.
However, it's still a little rocky because these editorials still aren't very clearly signed. Nobody on earth seems to understand what an editorial board is. And they still want to speak for the paper. We had this experience really vividly in 2012 when Doug Manchester took over the paper at the Union Tribune, and he clearly supported certain candidates and causes. And I think he clearly bought it, thinking that he could direct and be the conductor of this orchestra towards his political goals, right? And he very quickly found out that the editor-in-chief, Jeff Light, wasn't totally on board with that. And to his credit and to Jeff's credit, they held a certain line, right? However, what they gave him was this editorial board. You can still do your editorial board, and it can be the view of the paper. So remember, they did that couple front page editorials in support of Carl DeMaio for mayor. But they would say, like, it's
people always mention the editorial in favor of Carl DeMaio. That wasn't the best one. Clearly, the best one was the endorsement of the film Obama's America 2016, which also ran on the front page.
Yeah. No, that was a regular editorial.
Was it?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
I don't know, but I remember reading
that was the best.
That was fire.
That was fire.
But you bring up something that I think is really important and kind of why we're in this position right now at this moment, because, you know, in 2012, the front page placement was a big part of like what got people's ire. And we're getting farther and farther away from a point where like a physical paper is like people's experience of journalism. And so I think the confusion in a big way lies from this fact that there is no like separate opinion section that is so clearly marked, because, you know, everything's just one click away from everything else. And so that's where I think a lot of the confusion comes from, is that actual physical separation of the opinion section.
Yeah, exactly. And
I think that's a good point, and it makes me wonder why there hasn't been some evolution in design.
Yeah, exactly.
That creates a new version of that distinction.
Yeah, and so there's been 3 incidents recently that really have brought attention to this, not necessarily locally, but since we're thinkers on journalism, want to talk about it. One was this front page editorial that was ran in the Birmingham News, and it says at the top, it says "Our View," which a normal person looking at that would think that's the view of the newspaper.
Yes.
And then underneath in big headline type, bigger than the name of the newspaper, "Stand for Decency, Reject Roy Moore. Doug Jones is the only candidate worthy of representing Alabama." And then underneath it, it just says AL.com editorial board. Like, not even a buy there. It's just like, so it's like they're trying to have it both ways. You get our view of the editorial board. And so there was a discussion that came after that about, well, is this the view of the paper? And locally, Matt Hall, the editor of the UT, was making the case that no, obviously the reporters are still independent. And my point is, like, how can they possibly say that they don't have this view after the newspaper literally says on the biggest possible way that this is our view?
Yeah. So here's what I don't understand about your point, maybe, is so are you saying that it is entirely reasonable, and in fact maybe the only way to expect a reasonable reader to respond to this is to accept that this is the paper's view, and to carry that through to say that the reporters can't reasonably be expected to differentiate themselves from this view? Or are you saying that that of course the reporters have their own set of standards and practices that are not tarred by this, but we have this convention that makes it impossible for them to assert those things?
I don't really think those are in conflict. That's kind of what I'm both saying. So on the one hand, yes, when it says that, our view, the newspaper shouldn't do that without accepting the responsibility that it has burdened everybody who works there with the label that that's their view.
And so do you think an individual reporter from that paper, if they go out into the field and they are challenged by a candidate or source who says, why would I expect you to represent my views fairly and accurately when I know this is where you're coming from. Do you think they would be wrong to say that's not me? That I do not feel that way. That is different. There's a distinction.
I think they can try. They can say whatever they want.
Yeah.
I just think that they have to expect. They can't say no. You were reading that wrong. You're misinterpreting that.
Mm-hmm.
They can say, look, this is how this works, and you can trust me or not if you want. I actually don't believe that, and I can get your views into the paper appropriately and fairly. They can make that case if they want. I'm just saying that they can't blame the person for making the conclusion that that's what the paper believes. That is because it literally is what the paper says it believes.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think you're right that there's a lot better design that could be done and that the onus should be on papers to, like, make the distinction clear. But at the same time, it's, like, wholly disingenuous for somebody like a Roy Moore who's been in politics for decades to say, like, they don't understand the distinction between reporters and the editorial board because, like, you've been in this game for 30 years and you've had 1,000 stories written about you, and to act like you only don't know how this works now is, just not true.
Right. So there's bad faith arguments being made.
Sure.
And so there is a legitimate level of confusion by some number of people. I mean, honestly, I was pretty well into my journalism career before I fully understood this distinction, honestly. So there are people who are in bad faith taking that confusion and weaponizing it into this corollary of a fake news accusation, basically.
Well, I don't know if they are weaponizing. They are saying your view, your newspaper says this is your view.
Yeah, our view is bad wording.
The second thing that came up was this weird sting that hit the Washington Post, and there was this undercover video from Project Veritas, and the guy's trying to explain awkwardly the difference between the editorial board that is clearly hostile to Trump and his reporting, which is not.
Yeah.
Which is like, again, I think it's just another weaponizing of that vulnerability that's just difficult to communicate because it's weird. It's weird to say this reflects our view. However, it does not. It does not reflect the view of the most important part of our organization.
Right, but is it difficult because people are being intentionally obtuse?
Yeah,
or because it's difficult?
Or I think it's both, and there's also like a middle ground where like people should be better educated about how the news works to some extent. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's our responsibility to communicate as much as we can about how we do our jobs. But, like I said, editorial boards have been around for, more than a century, and now you're like shocked that they exist. Like, there's part of that that's like, not
I think that
my problem.
The solution, in my opinion, really is you can keep having those views, and they should. And I think that newspapers have a particular insight on what's happening. I guess I would want them to get rid of the voice of God presentation, unless you're willing to say literally this is our view as a paper. Like, you either put a byline on it that this is one person or specific group of people's views and really be clear about how it's their views. Or if you do the voice of God house editorial, then say this is something we all have to accept. And even if there's an employee here that doesn't accept it, they are buying in that the organization as a whole has had a process to decide that that's the editorial vision of the paper.
Yeah. Well, so I guess to Sarah, I would say these are very old. It's over a century
absolutely.
Old. What I don't know is 100 years ago or 80 years ago, would a individual reporter with the paper do what an individual with a reporter is doing today, which is to assert that they are not that they are in fact separate from the editorial board? It seems to me at least possible that that's a relatively new conceit. That
it's about the 60s or so that form of editorial boardness evolved.
Yeah,
I guess it just depends on what you mean.
Like editorial boards and endorsements existed in the 1880s, but I'm not certain that a reporter at that time would have gone about town and said like, no, I do not reflect the views of Sun papers.
Sure, but I think for maybe the last 50 years they have. Yeah.
So my question here is like, what are we fighting for to maintain this relic? Like, what is the thing that we do not want to let go of, and how valuable is it? Because
I think there's value in an institutional voice. I think there can be tremendous value, especially because, you know, to me, an unsigned editorial, all those people are journalists. Maybe some of them represent the publishing side, but typically, traditionally, they're all journalists and have backgrounds in reporting. And they're saying all of our collective experience as journalists and from reading and vetting the work that our journalists do have led us to this point. And so, you know, I'm like a huge nerd about newspaper editorials and opinions, and like hold them very dear to my heart. Like the one that comes up for me is the series of editorials that the New York Times board did about New York's stop and frisk policy, and how they came out and said, you know, this is racist, this is wrong, this isn't who we are. And those, if you go back and read them, they are so powerful. They make me emotional still. And like, if, you know, David Brooks or somebody hadn't written those, it just wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And the UT itself won Pulitzer Prizes, or a Pulitzer Prize, for its editorials on immigration back in the 80s. And I think there is a certain power to it. What I'm rejecting is that this conceit that it does reflect the paper's views, however it doesn't.
But it kind of doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like you got to make that choice. I'm sorry, like and if you're not willing to, I don't think that it carries that power, like you said. Like, and that's the third thing that came up this week was the New York Times editorial board was literally lobbying people to call congressmen and women to oppose the tax reform that was going forward. Yeah. And that struck people as odd, and they're like, this newspaper is just lobbying things, and everybody's like, well, that's the editorial board, not the actual paper. And again, it's like, that's just a fight that's very difficult to win.
Yeah.
All right, we have a good show this week. We are talking with David Malmuth and Pete Garcia, the people behind the IDEA District and their new building.
IDEA 1,
sorry. It's part of the IDEA District.
Yes.
And the transformation of East Village. We also have our Hero and Goat coming up after the break for the radio audience. And we're going to talk right now about new developments in the issue of what's going to happen to that land in Mission Valley that used to be home to the Chargers. It's the new story in town.
It is. And I guess, all right, so San Diego State released its master plan for what it would use the land for.
It's sort of draft vision. So there's basically three things, right? Soccer City has on the ballot right now a measure to do an entertainment district, thousands of homes, a river park, and a stadium and soccer, and their soccer connection, right, with Major League Soccer.
Yeah.
Then there's the Friends of San Diego State, which we had on the podcast a couple weeks ago. And they're collecting signatures right now at $5 per signature, found from our buddies on the hotline.
Okay.
And they are trying to get their measure on the ballot, which simply says we're going to let the San Diego State purchase this land. That's it. That's all that measure does. And now San Diego State is saying this is what we'll do with that land. This is a vision of it. They didn't release like a long master plan. It was just like, this is what we want to do. And basically, they want to build 4,500 homes. They want to do some retail. They want to do
a river park.
The river parks, we'll talk about that for a second. It's not part of that. But
it's listed in there.
It's listed in there. However, it's not part of the purchase that they would make of the land.
Well, now you're crossing the lines between the two things that are supposed to be separate and distinct.
Okay, fine. So yes, they do say they want to build a river park. And we went back and forth trying to clarify. They also have some retail and campus space, and then of course a stadium, a slightly bigger stadium than the soccer team.
Right. And it's, I mean, there's a certain matter of this that's like, we're going to have a campaign deciding between two visions that are like different in degree.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Not categorically different. And that's just a very strange choice to put to thousands of voters.
Yeah, I mean, the city is basically saying the city itself cannot deal.
Yeah, they've checked out. We're like, we could never possibly be trusted to develop this property and chart out our own vision and just do it. that can't happen. It could only be third parties.
This clash of developer titans, right?
Yeah.
And so San Diego State, to do all this, will have to partner with private developers. So basically, we're choosing between these private developers from FS or the private developers associated with San Diego State.
And they've each outlined visions that are, like, they're different. Make no mistake. They're not the same, but they're not that different, right? Like, if you just...
Right, what are the big differences? Just,
there's
how much office space one will have versus the other?
There's like way more retail space in the FS Investors Plan, which includes like restaurants and stuff.
Yeah, basically the biggest difference is that the retail space, which they say is important, the FS soccer guys say for an entertainment district. They picture people leaving the soccer games and then going and dancing and stuff and maybe getting some tacos.
Right, and also making a lot of money.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And then the San Diego State only provides about 1/7 of the retail space, and that's mostly for laundry and other places for the people who might live in the area, right?
Yeah. And I keep thinking about, like, every time an election comes about, I have friends who don't live and die in politics, and they want to get like a very simple couple sentences on all the measures. And like my couple sentences on all the measures would be, for those two plans, would be the same.
Yeah.
Like they're not different enough that in the most simplified summary of what they do, there would be any difference.
So
be like, they're the same, but
the thing
one's a little
that
bigger.
Probably doesn't land with most people is that the SDSU proposal is still a private development proposal. I think people hear SDSU and they think, oh, it's our university. We want to help them. We want them to achieve their vision. And it doesn't really like sink in that it's actually developers who are going to be doing all of this.
Yeah, I mean, the university would own the land. However, to pull any of this off, they're going to have to work with private developers.
I mean, at any point that something is built, there will be a developer doing that building.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, the other thing I wanted to discuss was this park. So basically the initiative that the Friends of SDSU are putting up, that would allow the San Diego State to purchase the land around Qualcomm Stadium, but not the river park. And the only thing they say about the river park in this SDSU plan is, we'll take care of it. We promise we will build a park. But that means it would still be city land, and so they would have to somehow get the money to the city, and they haven't explained just where that money would come from. The second part, the Soccer City now, they would actually lease that whole part, including that park, and then they would set aside $40 million, and that $40 million would drop to $20 million if the city doesn't approve the plan for the park as soon as possible. And so it's just a different in quality. That's one of the main differences of the two plans. All right, stay tuned for the rest of the show after the break. This has been done in partnership with our friends and partners at News Radio 600 Cocoa.
I'm Janice Shatman. I'm a fairly recent, I'm a newcomer to San Diego County. I retired here. I'm a member of the Voice of San Diego because when I came here, I knew nothing. An extended family member pointed out Voice of San Diego, and I've been an avid listener ever since. Everything that I knew that allowed me to vote intelligently on local issues came from the Voice of San Diego. And if you don't support investigative journalism like that, it won't be there for you.
I'm Ben Haddad. I'm a Voice of San Diego member. I support Voice of San Diego because it is a vital resource to our community. It's just important that we stay on top of what's going on, and you guys are very much in the forefront of reporting. You have to be able to shine the light on things to get to the bottom of stuff. It'd be nice if folks were more honest, just in general, all over the world, everywhere, but that's just not the way it is. People want to hide things, and the press is so instrumental in rooting a lot of that out.
As an independent nonprofit news organization, Voice of San Diego is guided by its mission. Every day we publish stories that define the conversation in San Diego, stories that inspire a community of critical thinkers and shape our shared reality. But in return, we depend on this community, on you, to support our critical work. Your contribution today enables Voice of San Diego to cover San Diego and its complex conversations around accountability, good government, and pressing local issues. Quality journalism makes a difference, and your support makes what we do each day at Voice of San Diego possible. Without you, stories wouldn't just go unread, they would go untold. Donate today at voiceofsandiego.org and invest in our journalists' work. Informative, engaging stories that we are all better for having read. All right, we're back from the break. Thank you. This is Scott Lewis with my friend Andrew Keatts and Sara Libby. We are going to talk about something else now, and I keep getting these feelings that people aren't really understanding the big changes that might be coming, and I talked about that with marijuana and the legalization, but I also don't think people realize that the city of San Diego is making a decision pretty soon about a major change to how we get electricity, how we purchase it, and who does that on our behalf.
What kind we use.
Yeah, and that the monopoly, the state sort of sanctioned monopoly of the utility companies, San Diego Gas and Electric, is in jeopardy. Like there is a proposal going forward to make it so that the city creates an institution, an agency that purchases the power that then you pay for on your bill.
May I offer a defense of the people who seem not to understand the enormity of the potential change?
Yeah.
I think that it is in fact so gigantic, and since so little ever actually happens in this city, that it's just impossible to reconcile those two facts and think that this might actually happen.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah, I think that might be
nothing interesting happened. That's the doctrine of nothing interesting ever happens.
We discuss things that may happen, but in the end, inevitably, they don't happen.
It's really, it plays out in that joke.
What has happened in the last 5 years here?
Well, there's that meta joke in sports Twitter about renderings, right?
Yes.
Like that
San Diego's like world class at renderings.
Yeah, that for the last 15 to 20 years we've had.
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, it's hilarious. There was so Monday, the San Diego State announces that it's going to do this announcement about its vision for Mission Valley, and one of those San Diego State bloggers from Kabir 30, right?
Yeah, Bo's website.
Yeah, he tweeted, National Weather Service issues rendering warning, severe rendering warning for Wednesday. I mean,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. There's this just big joke that's all we do is we just think, and so nothing interesting will ever happen. So yeah, that's your point. That's the doctrine of nothing interesting will ever happen.
Right. Which has like 100% success rate in this city so far.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
However, so this week, Rai Rivard, he's been following this issue for us. This is called community choice aggregation. This is again, San Diego State or San Diego Gas and Electric would still run the power.
Right.
They would still maintain the power lines and all that stuff. It's just that the contracts for the electricity that they get would be done through the city as opposed to through them.
Right.
Now, the mayor recently, last week, didn't stop that from happening.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. They did a feasibility study that basically said, yes, this is feasible. It stopped there, basically. And so what the mayor did last week was put forward a memo that said, we're going to do two things at once. The city is going to build a business plan, which would maybe be more specific about what a community choice aggregator, a city-run government buying agency would look like, how much it would charge, what it would be able to achieve in terms of converting to renewable energy. Start to put some meat on the bone. But he also said the alternative to doing that is SDG&E comes up with some solution that provides the renewable energy that we're looking for. And they need to show us what that would look like too. So he called on the city to put together a business plan and for SDG&E to put its proposal on paper.
So the other thing that San Diego does really, really well is studies.
Yes.
There's a lot of studies.
It's part of the system. Yeah.
But I thought Rai made a good point of this thing that would normally sound like, oh, you're just, kicking the can down the road. Let's study it more. It sounds like kind of lame. When the county had the choice to study CCAs, they said, no, we're not even going to take that step. And so in that sense, it is an actual proactive decision that could, make CCA a reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fair to say that the mayor was the editor-in-chief of this feasibility report, right? And he could have killed it in that process.
Yes.
And the process of building a business plan has to happen at some point between now and whenever the city council eventually adopts or doesn't adopt the plan anyway. So it's not it's not like this is some added thing that delays the process more. It's a necessary component of a final decision.
Yeah, and so the other thing that, like you said, that he put in motion was that San Diego Gas and Electric can put together its own proposal about how it would reach 100% renewable sources of electricity for San Diego
by 2035.
By 2035. Now that is mandated in the much ballyhooed community climate action plan, and so that's where we're starting. So now San Diego Gas and Electric is not that bad as far as renewable. It's one of the leaders. It gets 40% of its electricity now from renewable sources. And what the argument is, and they haven't actually said this, that they can't get to 100. And so I guess what will go forward is some sort of well, here's how we'll get to 100% or close to it, and then they'll have to kind of compete.
The way I took it was the mayor saying to them, make your best offer.
Yeah.
You want us to turn down this? Well, make your best offer. Tell me what you can do. But what Rice also pointed out is that, like, this isn't a far-fetched thing anymore. Not only is the mayor continuing the process, but you can already start doing some vote counting and seeing that you're well within the striking distance, that there's 4 people who've all but said that they're ready to vote for it, and 3 more who have not shut down the discussion. Now the Myrtle Cole council president has characteristically refused to say anything. But
that's not true. She said that she will say something
at an undisclosed date
point.
At some point. That's true.
So
that's not nothing. That isn't nothing.
It's fair to say she has never spoken to us, right?
No, never.
It's very difficult.
Is it fair to say she's never spoken?
I don't know. And it's not that she's mad at us. She couldn't be mad at us, I don't think, for anything. We've never really done anything.
No.
We've
got a standing offer to be on the podcast.
We've pointed out that she hasn't spoken about things.
Maybe that's true.
So
maybe that's its own self-fulfilling thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there's the 4 most progressive or liberal Democrats, and then there's Myrtle Cole potentially, and then even Councilman Mark Kersey and
Scott Sherman
have shown interest in it. And so if it's just a 5 vote, they can get it. If it's 6, then they can make sure that even if the mayor's opposed to it, they get it, right?
Right.
So it's now politically viable. And the other thing that Rye pointed out is that the decision's going to be made under the mayor's watch, that he's insisting he's not trying to punt this to the next mayor.
Right. So, and a mayoral spokesperson said that on the record. So, it's not anything that he couldn't decide not to do between now and next year, but it is something that they've said on the record they intend to do by the end of next year.
So by the end of 2018, we will know whether the city is going to try to take the power of purchasing of power away from San Diego Gas and Electric.
Correct.
I'd say asterisks because San Diego
has a way of not doing things. Yes.
Exactly.
Rendering severe chance of renderings.
Metaphorically, this business plan is a rendering of sorts,
That's
is
true.
it not? Yeah.
All right, our hero of the week.
This one goes to State Assemblywoman Marie Waldron. So as we're continuing to hear story after story of sexual harassment allegations from everywhere, Hollywood, politics, journalism, the legislature had a hearing this week about sexual harassment in the Capitol and how to respond to it. Marie Waldron's the vice chair of that committee. And I thought she asked some really good questions about how it's handled in Sacramento and what we can do to improve the process. One question she asked was why people accused of harassment, their identities are kept private even after claims have been substantiated and people have been disciplined for it. So, why are we continuing to protect those people's identities? And I spoke with her this week, just about how they're going to go about the process of making things easier for victims and easier for people to come forward. So look forward to see, what comes out of that.
Can we also talk about her money quote?
Which one?
The one about the bag of chips.
Oh, yeah. So she started off the hearing by saying...
Which one?
Yeah, she's got some good quotes. She started off the hearing by saying she was really frustrated that there were colleagues of hers in the assembly who thought that they were all that in a bag of chips, meaning they were above being held accountable for their bad behavior. And I thought that was pretty funny.
It was very important to me that you told me that this was part of a pre-written statement that she was reading.
It was.
Because it's possible, I could imagine a scenario in which she's
ad-libbing.
Ad-libbing and she's trying to say what these men think they are, and she's at a loss for words, and she just ends up blurting out, they think they're all that in a bag of chips.
No, it was part of her written introductory remarks, so that was great.
Good stuff.
So there's a really interesting Twitter exchange between, what's Nancy Pelosi's daughter's name again?
Christine?
Yeah, so she is...
the Democratic Women's Caucus, or
yeah,
California Women's Caucus.
She's having this incredible exchange with Lorena Gonzalez on Twitter right now, where Lorena Gonzalez, Assemblywoman's trying to say, like, tell us who the rapists are in the legislature, which itself is just this like striking.
Absolutely.
Because and she's saying like, don't just be vague. Here she is saying, I believe them too about the women who are saying this. That's why I want to know who these rapists are. You stood before a committee and said, we know who they are. When I said I had never heard of rape in the Capitol until this, you attacked me and said I didn't know because I'm a legislator. Well, how can we all know but not know? It's like this really intense peaked moment in Sacramento, it seems like.
Yeah, and Marie Waldron said something similar where like she's on this committee that is tasked with dealing with these complaints, and she had no idea that a lot of these accusations were out there because they don't rise to this level of where they inform the actual lawmakers. It's handled at sort of like an HR level.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there is really an outcry of like, what is happening? We didn't know any of this.
Yeah. All right, our GOAT of the week.
You lose! Good day, sir!
So this goes to the San Diego Unified School District. There's a really troubling bunch of vacancies in the special education. So it's one thing to cut the budget and not have resources for something, but these are budgeted positions at San Diego Unified. There are 100 vacant special education aide vacancies. There are 11 full-time teacher vacancies, and nearly all the classes for students, and that includes nearly all the classes for students with the most severe disabilities. And there's another 37 positions for special education credentialed teachers that are currently being filled by interns. And so, like, I don't know if there's some hang up in their hiring process, but again, these are budgeted positions, or the alternative would be that they're just deliberately not filling those positions out of some budgeting gimmick, but it's having real world consequences. Maya Sri Krishnan talked to a parent in Sherman Heights whose severely autistic child had lost an aide that had helped a lot in the past, and now she was worried about some of the harm and just the safety of the child. It's having real impacts. And if there's space in the budget and there are actual positions, then fill them. And if there's not, then you need to admit that you've made a cut.
Right. Yeah.
So this is not a laughing matter. This is important. These are the most underserved kids and most, especially in an underserved neighborhood. Like, let's not, because if it happened at my school, I have a feeling people would be in an uproar, and I don't want to live with that inequity if that's true. So let's see what the issue is there, filling those vacancies, or if they're not vacancies, what the cut was. All right, this has been the Voice of San Diego. On podcast, we are going to talk with David Malmuth and P. Garcia from the IDEA District. Okay, we are joined in the great Voice of San Diego podcast studio. Probably the most important, most prestigious, and most beautiful podcast studio in downtown San Diego, I think.
I think so.
I mean, look, this hasn't been scientifically established, but it's important.
We all know.
And we are joined by Pete Garcia and David Malmuth, the partners of IDEA Partners. And the first project of that development group is IDEA 1, and it's done in East Village. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And it's part of a rapidly transforming neighborhood. And how's it going?
Great. We call it the IDEA District.
Right.
All right, so let's maybe this will be a good place to set the stage. Give us your best elevator pitch explanation for the distinctions between East Village, the IDEA District, Maker's Quarter, and where that process is right now.
Russian dolls.
Yes, okay, go ahead. So explain the Russian nesting dolls of the eastern edge of East Village.
So the biggest doll is East Village, which is plus or minus 165 acres. And then within that, the upper East Village is IDEA District, which is about 90 acres. So it's bounded by 11th and Market and the Freeway and City College. And then Maker's Quarter is a quarter of IDEA District. And in fact, when it was created, which is now probably 4 years ago, we were told that the reason they called it quarter was because it was a quarter of IDEA District.
Okay. And so then the other 3/4 are IDEA District.
Right.
The first project of that is completed, which is IDEA 1.
Yeah, our first project is IDEA 1. But
I guess there's other stuff.
Yeah, the concept's been 7 years that Pete and I have been working on this. So a number of other really exciting things have emerged. Some of them temporary, like Silo or Courtyard. Some permanent, like Urban Discovery Academy, Fab Lab. And so part of what's for us exciting about IDEA District is that we're not the ones that are driving a lot of the projects. We think we helped to set a vision for it and create some principles. But the energy that has gone into actually realizing these projects is from those individual entrepreneurs who said, hey, we like the concept and we want to be a part of what's happening here.
Yeah, 7.5 years ago when we met, we found that there was a need to establish an innovation district in San Diego, especially Innovation 2.0, which is an urban innovation district, not Innovation 1.0, which is more like the suburbs, like around UCSD. So we came up with, we believe to be the right thing, which is at the intersection of design and technology. So our innovation district, we call it IDEA, Innovation, Design, Education, and Arts. So we have been evangelizing that concept, and we believe that our project is kind of catalytic in making that happen. And we have been, again, evangelizing for 7.5 years, and as a result of that, like David said, different projects and different stakeholders have actually then are using our kind of a concept to get the place developed.
And so what are in terms of innovation, arts, design, technology, what are the primary tenets, the anchors for the district that either exist today or that are coming?
Well, one of the major anchors, perhaps the one most recently announced, is UC San Diego's urban campus, which was announced almost a year ago that they were going to do it. It started construction about 6 months ago. And that's profound because having that kind of an institutional stamp of approval really means a lot. And one of the things that you learn when you look at IDEA districts or innovation districts around the world is that they're driven by ideas. And usually those come in the form of institutes of higher learning that are research-based. So for us to have UC San Diego, which is one of the premier institutions worldwide in research, to say we want to be part of the downtown, we want to make a contribution for all of the reasons that they've articulated, is for us is that's jet fuel for helping to drive the innovation cluster that we hope will emerge in IDEA District.
And it really started, again, 7.5 years ago when David and I met with Mary Walshock of UCSD. And we told her about our concept of having an Innovation 2.0. We really wanted to be design-centric. And she said to us at lunch, she said, well, that's interesting, but you really should not abandon technology. And she said, you really should make it about both. And we said, bingo. And that was really the beginning. And then, of course, we've been sort of romancing her to get UCSD in the IDEA District, and there it is.
And we have a great education cluster. The spine of East Village is education. There's 9 institutions from City College at the north all the way down Marnock School in Barrio Logan, including UC San Diego. There's still a lot of room for improvement, absolutely, in terms of jobs and job creation. And this is important. Pete and I started this because we wanted to be able to create a vibrant jobs cluster in East Village. Downtown has been mostly about residential over the last 20 years. So we've done a really good job of creating housing, and that's wonderful because we have, almost 40,000 downtown residents. But the tragedy is that 3/4 of them have to leave downtown every day to go to their job, right? So that's one of the problems. The other problem is we got a lot of people who are living downtown right now who can't afford to live downtown, or working downtown, can't afford to live downtown. So there's this mismatch, and what that ends up feeling like is a very hollowed out downtown in lots of places. So we really wanted to try to get that fit better between jobs and housing, so that we had a downtown that was vibrant 24/7.
Yeah. So when we actually started, we started as an economic development initiative, not as a real estate initiative, even though we both have a real estate background. We felt like in order to bring prosperity, we needed to create or really start a place that would attract and retain this cohort of well-educated people. And all the research shows that that's really what brings prosperity, because that creates clean, high-paying jobs and everything that goes around it. So we really started with that premise, and then we started doing a lot of research, talking to a lot of people, and that's kind of where we're at. But you really need a mix of residential, retail, and office.
So how do you attack that issue, that mismatch that you described, through physical development, through the physical form? Because what IDEA District doesn't have, which may be a strength, maybe a weakness, who knows, is there's no subsidy. Redevelopment doesn't exist any longer. It's not a city-sponsored initiative that has this, the power of government to coerce things.
Yeah.
You have a loosely affiliated group of private developers pushing their own projects. So how do you attack that mismatch just by the activity of real estate development?
Yeah, well, there's a couple thoughts. We did have redevelopment when it started.
Okay, did you?
Yeah, but that went away.
Yeah.
And of course, that makes it extremely difficult to do the public improvements that are necessary. We now do have funding for East Village Green, and that'll start construction.
Yeah, but where does that, describe where that is?
So it's catty corner from IDEA 1. It's right across the street from the new school. So it's between 13th, 14th, and F&G.
F&G.
Full city block, 2 levels of parking below grade, and a city park up above. So that'll be a major public improvement and will change the nature and the character. But Pete was talking about the research they did. One of the things that we discovered in successful innovation districts is that what they started to do first was to create a magnet for the talent that would become attractive to the companies that would come later. So it's creating, through the lens of placemaking, and since we're real estate guys, this is kind of how we look at the world. Through that lens, how do we start to fashion a place that is attractive to people who are going to be the sorts of employees that growth companies are going to want to employ? And without having all those tools of government, it's harder to do. There just is. But it's kind of a litmus test, because in order for it to be successful, it has to be embraced by the people on the ground, by the market, by the community. They have to feel it's worthy in order for it to be realized.
But it is what it is. You either whine and complain the fact that there's no subsidies and you don't do anything, or you go out and do it. And you go out and do it with a lot of tenacity and hard-headedness and track record. And then actually being able to have a great message, the fact that for San Diego to be competitive in the world's market, we really need to have an urban core to compete with Seattle and Portland and Denver and so forth and so on. So the message really resonated. And we moved forward, and then we were able to convince people to, put their money where their dream is.
So these are all really important and interesting concepts. I guess, what is it? I mean, it's a building, right, with homes, with housing units inside. Is there any office space built in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me tackle that. We felt like it was very important to not just build another apartment complex.
Okay.
So our original concept was to do at least 50% of the project as office. To make a very long story short, we spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to create that. We couldn't, because we could not get financing. You need to have pre-leases for about 60-70% of the project leased as office. And what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You got to build it before they come, blah, 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 blah. So what we did, we said, well, you know what? We're going to go ahead and design the building with the 50% office. And then we convinced the lender to actually finance the project, because we were going to improve the inside of the office building as residential. And they said, oh, okay, go ahead and do that. So we have a 60,000 square foot office building. That 8,000 of that is office, and the rest is improved inside as residential. if Google comes to town and says, hey, we want the rest of the building, we'll rip out the toilets and the closets and the washer and dryers and have a 60,000 square foot building that is designed for innovation creative companies. So it was a bold move, but we stuck to our guns and did it.
So for now, it's apartments, but it could be...
We have a ground floor tenant. Sear Interactive took 7,700 square feet. They're actually moving in on Monday. So
digital media company,
which is great, perfect for the
And then there's like about 7,700 square feet of retail space as well.
And there's
restaurant.
5,000 square feet of retail space, 2 restaurants. One is called Lola 55, which is the gourmet taco place, and Young Hickory is taking 18. But the bigger sort of response to the question, Scott, is that we weren't satisfied just doing 7,700 square feet of office space. What we felt strongly about was making sure that there was an environment that would grow the next great San Diego company. If we couldn't get a Qualcomm, an Illumina, fill in the blank, we wanted to be the place where that next company was being birthed. And we feel strongly that that happens through bringing the right people together and allowing for collisions to happen. And so we have this space, this 12,000 square foot space called the Hub, which is at the heart of the project, which unlike most spaces downtown, it's not privatized. We've really created a space that's porous and that connects to the street, and that can become a stage for the creativity of the district to play itself out. We're hopeful, and our expectation is as the project fills up over the next year, that the residents of the project will say, hey, we have all kinds of things that we'd like to do to activate that space. Some will be social, but there'll be some work-related. In fact, Sear has also already said to us through their partnerships with Microsoft and Google that they want to have meetups happen in that space. And that's really exciting to us because that can lead to is the potential for some of these really exciting collaborations to occur that could lead to the next great idea.
Yeah, the big idea is placemaking. In order to attract this cohort that I'm talking about, you got to have a place that is really attractive to their mindset and their desires and wishes and aspirations. And we have actually set the bar based on a lot of research, a lot of experience. We have created, designed, and built a project that has all those elements, and we're seeing it. We have curated everything. I mean, the people who are moving in are designers, artists, creative people in the technology field. The tenants, the commercial tenants are also, and the job tenants are that. And we believe that downtown San Diego needs to do that in order to really attract those people that will bring prosperity. If not, it's going to be just another neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
One thing our colleague Kinsey Moreland's been writing a lot about, and you just mentioned arts, which is part of the acronym for IDEA, is the disappearing art spaces in places like East Village and Barrio Logan. So can you talk about whether artists and affordable spaces for them fit into this idea, or is it just kind of like an honor system for developers to somehow incorporate arts into their projects?
Well, let me respond to that. I'm a painter, in addition to being, an engineer and so forth and so on. Artists need several things. They need a place to work, to create. They need a place to show. Our leasing office is actually designed as a gallery. And we plan to have, and we already started, to have a rotating series of local artists to show their work. The Hub, as David said, is also kind of a private-public space in order to allow people, a lot of artists, to show their work. And actually, we're going to have classes and so forth and so on. So are we going to have places where an artist can live if they have enough money? Yes. It is kind of expensive. So, maybe some will, so maybe won't. But we are going to provide space for artists to show their work. But by the way, we had no responsibility to spend any money on art, and we have spent over $250,000 in art around the project, a lot of it outside of the building so people can enjoy it. And we have another $250,000 in art initiatives with the project. So we really put our money where their mouth is.
I had so last year we had a big community conversation about East Village, and it was in response to the Chargers' idea of a big stadium that would kind of really block that cohesive feel between Barrio Logan and downtown and that new area. But in response to that, there was a sort of tour, you guys and Rob Quigley and others went around town presenting a different vision.
Correct.
And it was a vision of there being kind of a Main Street feel that comes out of the Petco Park area and drives through that bus yard right now and becomes a true thing. Now, I'll leave them unnamed, but certain cynics who might remind... whose name might sound like Randy Keatts,
you
didn't
even have the respect to rhyme my last name. You just used my last name.
We remember him.
Yeah, I think he made a good point that's something that seems to come up, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about how you put it, but that's the kind of thing that would come up in response to something like this, but it would be really hard to ever see it actually happen, or it might get just jettisoned the moment that the threat is removed. And in particular, the push to take that MTS property back, that bus yard property, and really do something urban and design oriented with that. Was that really just kind of a show to oppose the Chargers, or is there any actual momentum you can point to?
It wasn't just a show. And the fact that I can point to is that the Padres have now taken upon themselves to create a master plan for Tailgate Park. And it is very consistent with the vision that we had for East Village South. And in discussions with the Padres, what they've indicated is that they completely agree that it should be largely commercially oriented. And in fact, they were so committed to it that once the HQ2, the Amazon discussion started, they went directly to EDC and said, we want to put this site, this first 6 acres, on the table as a location, because they can do a couple million square feet of office space. Mm-hmm. So we were very gratified. We thought that we were on to the right idea. They have validated it. I don't think we'll probably get Amazon. But the point is that this is a major landowner and a big institutional player in San Diego that agrees that there's a much bigger opportunity than putting a football stadium on that site, which would have destroyed it in terms of its opportunity to really grow the kind of innovation cluster that we want to grow in East Village.
Mm-hmm. Well, the conversation really is, does downtown San Diego going to be a visitors area centric, or is it going to be an innovation centric? Tourists and visitors are fine, it's nice, but they create low-paying jobs. Innovation creates clean, high-paying jobs. So since we have very little downtown left to develop, and once you put a stadium or something like that, that's gone for 50 years, we really should be very careful on how we develop it. And we think there is a higher and best use to do something that really is going to attract high-paying jobs.
So you guys have said that this needs to become a place for people who live and work here.
Yes.
And that would be... That's going to be essential for the success of an innovation district.
Correct.
The way I see residential housing in downtown, and particularly in East Village right now, is pretty much like an hourglass. You've got new, you might have some lower end, but mostly new luxury-ish product, and then you've got like SROs and basically affordable housing. And there isn't much in the way of market rate, middle income housing in the area. Obviously, new developments, new projects are not usually going to be the place for middle income housing just by virtue of them being brand new. Brand new cars are not the cheapest cars on the roads. Same thing's true for apartments. But how can the development of East Village be inclusive to people of all income levels?
It's a great question.
Great question.
Great question, Andy.
And we're addressing that.
Yeah, and I want to challenge the notion that new development can't be available for people at middle incomes. In fact, we're creating a project now called IDEA 2 that's attempting to do exactly that, because we think the absolute critical need, not just for downtown San Diego, but for urban areas everywhere, is to create housing that can be afforded by people in that middle income range. Because if you can't do that, you're ending up with this dumbbell effect, right? And that doesn't make for healthy downtowns. And Richard Florida talked about it in his latest book. So we in the development community have to do a better job of coming up with ways that we can reduce costs. We have to partner with government so all of those fees actually go into improving the quality of the project. We have to do a better job working with landowners to try to reduce what they make up front and maybe make more later if a project becomes successful. All of those tools need to be brought to bear. So this project, this IDEA 2 project, is attempting to lower the price of apartments by 15 to 20%. So we can deliver a product that's right now not affordable by a lot of those people that are working downtown. And the project also includes on-site affordable because we think that should be integrated with every project downtown. But we're calling it attainable housing rather than as a distinction from affordable, because this isn't now depending on government money. If you're depending on government money to help to address the housing problem, you're going to be waiting forever. This really has to be a market-based response. So hopefully we'll be successful and we can create a model that can be utilized by others.
Yeah, you brought up the analogy of the cars.
Yeah.
Cars have different price points.
Right.
And we believe that even though it's very challenging, and David is putting a lot of effort into this, that we can create a price point 20% lower than the luxury that is going on right now.
What's the status of IDEA 2 right now? Where are you in the development pipeline?
So I control the site.
Which is?
It's a site that's owned by the San Diego Community College District. It's right across from San Diego High. It's a 73,000 square foot site. But it's got some challenges associated, which I won't get into all the details, but we need to work with the city to ensure that the use that we're proposing can be financed. Yeah. And so it's probably going to take a month or two to work that through. We're actually working right now with Civic and the city attorney's office and the council office to ensure that. But it feels, from the political support that we've gotten, it feels like this is exactly the right time to be proposing this kind of project and using it as a chance for all of us to put our best thoughts together to try to do something that's beautifully designed, but is at a price point that's much more attainable by people who right now are being shut out of the market.
You know, what's really interesting is that our approach is community before self, which is, you know who that comes from, one of our heroes. And the community has really responded well. I think that we are creating an innovation district without the demands of a sort of a government. But I think it's coming out really well. It's organic, but it's interesting, and I think it's going to address all the needs that we need to address.
Well, David Malmuth and Pete Garcia, thank you for coming in today. It sounds like an exciting project.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
The Voice of San Diego podcast is part of the Voice of San Diego podcast network. Visit voiceofsandiego.org/podcast to learn more about the Cura Chaos show about movers and shakers on both sides of the border, Beer Talk Radio, our business shows Startup Vault and I Made It in San Diego, and the rest of the shows in the network. If you like the show, go to voiceofsandiego.org and click the donate button. Or if you'd like to sponsor it, contact me at kinsey@vosd.org. That's KINSEE@vosd.org.